I suggest we get going. We will start with a brief introduction anyway. But so welcome everyone to this IMI Neuronet session around public-private partnerships in the post-COVID-19 era. I know we're not there yet, but it's a bit reflecting, let's say, on that. So my name is Lennert Steukers. I work as a clinical scientist at Janssen Pharmaceuticals, actually, or more specifically in the neuroscience therapeutic area, early development, and so with a specific focus on neurodegeneration. But so next to that, I'm also leading, and he's also in the audience together with Carlos Diaz from Synapse, the IMI Neuronet project. IMI Neuronet, maybe a bit of background. So it's a coordination and support action, an IMI project that is bringing together, let's say, and supporting 18 individual neurodegeneration projects of IMI. And so IMI is the Innovative Medicines Initiative, the largest public-private partnership in Europe. So the session of today is really, dedicated to discussing a bit on how COVID-19, so the pandemic raging across the globe, has affected research as such, specifically, of course, neurodegeneration at large, and specifically the impact on these public-private partnership projects as well. We will also zoom in a little bit on how these projects have been adapted, let's say, to what we can call now the new normal, and also then looking a little bit ahead and looking into where should we, maybe at first, how can we keep as such neurodegeneration really on the research funders' agenda, but how should we also be shaping these PPPs in the post-COVID-19 era? And I'm actually really happy that I do not need to reflect on these questions all by myself. So I do have a couple of excellent speakers, experts really in the field, and it's really spanning from biomarker discovery, data sciences, big data, biosensors, digital data, all the way to clinical research in general. And so I will just briefly introduce them to you. So they are actually all IMI project leaders within the neurodegeneration area. So I will just briefly introduce them. I will ask after that the actual person that has been introduced just says hi to the audience, so they kind of are able to link the bio to the actual face. That's always useful, let's say, and then we can definitely kick off. So we have Lynn Rochester on the line. Lynn is a professor and has an interest in digital healthcare, and also the role of digital technology in management of neurodegenerative diseases. She's the co-coordinator, as I already mentioned, of an IMI consortium project, Mobilize D, which is specifically aimed to develop and validate real-world digital mobility biomarkers, and is also the co-investigator of another IMI project, ID Fast, which is developing real-world digital measures for fatigue and sleep disturbances. So Lynn, if you can briefly say hi, then people know who you are.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to be part of this session, and I look forward to the discussion.
Okay, thanks. Okay, good. So the next one that I have in my list is Professor Pieter Jelle Visser. He's a clinical epidemiologist at Maastricht University. with a couple of academic affiliations to Amsterdam University Medical Center, but also the Karolinska Institute. He has been part of already many European Alzheimer's disease studies on early diagnosis and prognosis, as well as collaborative networks supporting the reuse of existing AD data for research. Also very active in the IMI and Horizon 2020 space. So Pieter Jelle has been or has played a key role in IMI EMIF. He also co-leads the Netherlands Consortium of Dementia Cohort Study, which will facilitate the pooling of data from 9 Dutch cohorts on aging and dementia. Pieter Jelle.
Yes, thank you for the nice introduction.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot. Next one up is Andrew Owens. So Andrew, over 10 years of experience in clinical and experimental research. He joined King's College London and specializes in designing and analyzing new behavioral paradigms that integrate psychological measures to actually study behavior, cognition, consciousness, and emotions. He has also worked on clinical trials, so has a clear clinical background or experience as well. Something that I specifically want to highlight, I was really pleased to see that, is that he also has experience of carrying out large public engagement projects, for example, at the Royal Opera House and the Tate Modern. So that's really great. And he's also involved in the IMI Radar AD project, which is primarily focusing on identifying and measuring how Alzheimer's disease affects the person with dementia's ability to function in everyday life. So Andrew, can you just say hi?
Thank you for that, Lennert. Hi, everyone.
Okay, good. We also have Walter Maetzler on the line from Germany. He's a full professor for neurogeriatrics and deputy director of the neurology department of the University Hospital in Kiel, Germany. His main clinical interest is on digital biomarkers for mobility in old and geriatric persons, especially in Parkinson's disease. And he's also, and then together with Lynn, a co-coordinator of IMI ID Fast project, also aimed at digital biomarkers. So Walter, if you can just speak up briefly.
Thank you very much, Lennert, for the nice introduction. Also very much looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, thanks a lot. And then last but not least, we do have Martin Hofmann-Apitius on the line as well, professor and extensive expertise in functional genomics and applied bioinformatics. He has experience in both academic and industrial research, and also a lot of experience in many collaborative research projects. He has led the Department of Bioinformatics at the Fraunhofer Institute for Algorithms and Scientific Computing, and is also professor for Applied Life Science Informatics at Bonn-Aachen International Center for Information Technology. Martin has been involved in IMI Ethionomy, so a project really aimed at generating a mechanism-based taxonomy for neurodegenerative diseases. So hi, Martin.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Lennert. Thanks for the intro and glad to be here.
Okay, good. Normally, we would also have, and I'm just briefly going to check if I don't see them. Oh, I see Jochen meanwhile joined as well, so that's also one of the panelists. So Jochen, so thanks for joining. I'm not sure if you're able to should be unmute yourself, and maybe you can put on your webcam as well. Okay, great. So I will just briefly
Okay,
introduce.
you just
Yeah, go ahead.
co-hosted me, yeah? Thank you very much.
Yeah, voila. Okay, we have you now. Thanks a lot. So maybe also then a brief introduction on Jochen Prehn. So he's also a professor and chairman of the Department of Physiology and Medical Physics at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and the director of the Center for Systems Medicines as well. He heads up a large, highly skilled and motivated research team, really at the interface of biomedical and translational systems biology research, of course, with a specific focus on neuroscience, neuro-oncology, and metabolic disorders. So Jochen is also leading the IMI-PD MitoQuant project. So welcome, Jochen, as well. Normally, we would also have Craig Ritchie in attendance, so the lead of IMI EPAD project. But unfortunately, due to a family emergency, he wasn't able to attend. But so with that being said, I think we have introduced all the speakers. Before we get the discussion going, so the Q&A happens just through the chat. So if you do have a question, then please just type it in, and then we will take these questions, along we go. And if there is still room or time at the end of the session, we can definitely look into a couple of these questions. Okay, so with that being said, it's time for me now to just briefly also shut up and then ask the panelists, in that sense, maybe to shed some light on how COVID-19 has impacted your research work, and of course specifically also in the many IMI projects that you're involved in. Yeah, whether you can share some of the hurdles you have encountered. I don't know if someone wants to volunteer to start.
Can do that if you let
Yes.
me.
Please.
Because I have a little COVID story to tell. The neurodegeneration project that I had initiated, Etionomy, was running between 2014 and 2018. So the funded phase ended in December 2018. The core of Etionomy was actually an exercise to organize data and knowledge in an entire domain, in the neurodegeneration domain. We were doing that for Alzheimer and for Parkinsonism. Core essential parts of Etionomy were, for instance, catalogs of data, and formalized representations of knowledge, knowledge represented in graphs as computable models. And when the COVID SARS pandemic struck us, and of course my research organization, Fraunhofer, tried to contribute to the overall fight against the virus, and I was asked, hey, what can you do, or what would you do if we would give you money? And I first of all told them that I didn't really want to enter that field, because it's distracting, if you start working on a virus and epidemiology and virus biology and stuff like that, it distracts you automatically from the core topic that we addressed over many years now, which is neurodegeneration, neurology in a wider sense. And still, there's also political pressure and so on. So in the end, I said, okay, what would we do? We would try to do what we have done in Etionomy. We would try to bring order into data and what we know about the virus and the virus-host interaction and so on. So to cut that short, within, let's say, 3 months of time, we came up not only with a referential ontology, which is a formal knowledge representation for COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2 biology, but we also did set up a complete information extraction pipeline for the virus biology and pathophysiology. And we came up with a huge knowledge-based model that we actually submitted at the same day when Reinhard Schneider did that. Reinhard Schneider is one of my friends, and a lot of people here in the audience know him. He's in Luxembourg with Rudi Balling. And Reinhard was doing a competing effort on a computable COVID-19 model. We submitted the same day, they had their paper out 2 weeks later. In our case, it took until just 2 weeks ago or so. So many, many months for the review process, which was a scandal. And I was, hammering on the editor and so on, but no effect. Anyway, we got it out now. We actually have taken then a lot of computable models, graph models of COVID biology from various sources and combined them, essentially creating the largest computable SARS-CoV-2 model worldwide, populated that with drug target information and all the repurposing drug experiments that have been published, including data from our own partners, the Fraunhofer IME Institute in Hamburg, that is a Evotec spin-out, and they are really good in screening. So they have their own drug repurposing screen, and we had all the signals of the drug repurposing screens worldwide mapped onto our computable model. And to cut that short, we have taken essentially an approach that we developed over 5 years in the IMI context and have adopted it to the virus biology within 6 months, coming up with what we call the COVID-19 pharmacome, which is a computable model that allows now to predict drugs and their interference with pathophysiology mechanisms of the virus. And that was quite a nice and impressive example. Of course, the virus biology is rather confined in comparison to the complex biology of neurodegeneration, but I think we can deliver really if people are interested in how you translate something developed in neurodegeneration research into very rapidly into a situation where you have to fight a virus. We have the perfect example for that.
No, and I think, when you just mentioned, Martin, that there is then a little bit the risk to, that it is distracting, right? All that work from your normal. Is that also being, is that the feeling also with some of the other panelists that you say and because it could be, I don't know, I think Walter, you're an MD, Pieter, Jelle, you're as well. Has there ever also been the request, that you should support the front line, if you like, and switch a little bit gears in terms of purely research, stepping into the COVID-19 or infectious disease area?
Yeah, maybe I can take over here. Yes, I'm an MD and geriatrician, and it was indeed also, this is first line, we are medical doctors also when it comes to crisis like we see here. And it was in fact the case also here in Kiel that we worked intensively on how to manage the diseased people. And this took a lot of time, effort, and resources, of course. This is also what we see in our research, that we have problems to allocate all the effort we planned to have in our projects to this research. But it is as it often happens, I think. So we are humans and we are very adaptive. And what I see now is that we learn a lot from COVID-19, and we learn how to adapt, and even that we learn out of what we see in COVID-19, that we can transfer this knowledge into other research projects. We can combine resources. Of course, we also start, for example, with an observational study now with COVID-19 people who had a disease, and to follow them up. And with regard to our IMI project, and I think Lynn can also comment on that. So we are in the field of digital technology and for the assessment in the home environment of people with neurodegenerative diseases. And so this is what I realize is, so first of all, COVID-19 is also a neurology disease. So we should not forget on that, and we can learn a lot also how brains change due to COVID. And another aspect is also that we learn how important it is to assess people in the home environment, and these are exactly the IMIs that focus on this, and we can really motivate people to take part in our studies simply because we say, okay, we have to move into the future with our disease management, and you can help us, you can contribute into this new generation of assessment when you help us with understanding how we do that. And so it's always, we have always two sides of a coin.
Yeah. Okay, and I know, Pieter, Jelle, so around the remote assessments and the digital, so I want to zoom in on that again a little bit later in the conversation in terms of the adaptation. So Lynn, hold your horses in that sense. But I just briefly want to hear also, Pieter, Jelle, did you experience the same? And I also, I mean, not only for you, but did you add a little bit the feeling that for some of your researchers in your team that I mean, one funding has run short or has been cut, or they see like longer timelines to complete their study work without any any additional funding to support that? Or did you experience a little bit in that sense that your research was hampered for your team?
Yeah, so of course we had several problems arising from COVID. A very practical one is that one of our PhD students got sick, so and didn't work for a few months. So and several others in our center also got sick. Another impact was that our physicians that do the research were reallocated to other tasks in the hospital, just to ensure the care, in particular in the first wave. So in the first wave, it's completely different. So everything was shut down. Patients, research participants were not allowed to come to the hospital. We were not allowed to go to the hospital. Yeah, and in the second wave, so the change has been less. So we can receive participants for clinical research. There's capacity for that. There are not so many patients at the moment. That may change, but still patients are reluctant to come just for a research project to the hospital for an assessment. But in terms of, yeah, well, and one practical issue, so nobody from EPIT is, or not the PI of EPIT is here. EPIT was shut just in a few months before the end of the project, when we were in full speed for completing the follow-up of the research individuals, and it had to stop suddenly. So that was really was a disappointment in terms of data collection. But regarding the funding, yeah, so there are calls, but the evaluation was delayed. Committees met remotely, interviews were done remotely. But at the end, the regular programs in the Netherlands, at least, continued. So the programs targeting early career stage PhD students, so they had the opportunity to apply for funding, but it took much longer than in the past. There are also some new calls on COVID now coming around. Another challenge of our PhD students is that they were not be able to go to a face-to-face conference. So and they considered it really as a pity. So they had to present a poster. They were sitting for the screen, saw nobody the whole day. and for them, it's really important to meet with other researchers and other PhD students. So it still is a difficult time for them to be engaged. And because most people have to work at home, they felt isolated. But it's a social thing, but also the exchange of ideas, the support they get from their peers is diminished. So that's another impact.
Yeah, and I think just to pick on that last, what you mentioned, I think, I mean, the Scottish Dementia Research Consortium, for example, also looked at that and conducted a survey specifically amongst early career researchers. And it's exactly what came out of that survey is that, in a way, there is an entire generation of researchers a little bit, at the moment at risk, right? Because they lose connection with, or there is a risk that they lose connection with the field. the survey also indicated that some of them, and I mean they are at their early stage in life, thinking about settling down, buying a house, that they are choosing for job security, and some of them have even moved into for example, the infectious disease area to have more job security, more funding in that sense. So I don't know, Andrew or Jochen, is that something that you have seen or experienced as well?
Yes, at the beginning, it was kind of a double-edged sword, because much of the research I'm doing at the moment is looking at remote digital assessments in neurodegeneration. So on the one hand, it did support the argument for that kind of intervention and that kind of work. But on the flip side of that, particularly at the beginning of lockdown, when we weren't able to run our memory clinics, we know how damaging social isolation is for all older adults, regardless of their cognitive status. So there was a real concern amongst us for, how can we in some way start running our assessments remotely? So that led us to doing assessments via the telephone, just as our NHS service, just so that, because the need of our patients hasn't changed, although there are a high risk of infection, they're also in need of clinical care as well. So it led us to be inventive and redirect our resources, while some of our staff were also redirected to the front line. So it's kind of a double-edged sword from that perspective. But in terms of the academic side, yes, it's not great that all these conferences have now been put online, and it's really not the same. The exchange of ideas, the networking is not the same. And also from a funding perspective, it's really only the large funding bodies that have anything not COVID centered at the moment. You go on any other funding body's website that's small to medium sized, and they're just saying that they suspended their calls for now. So it's had a really deleterious effect on early career researchers.
Yeah, I might just add to that. I fully agree. The exchange dissemination for our young researchers is really diminishing. There are some virtual meetings now, more and more in the field going ahead. Sometimes also spontaneous, just PIs set it up because it costs nothing. It's totally cheap. Having a virtual meeting now is really no cost. You don't have to get sponsored society behind you. You can just go ahead and do it. And in some areas, I've seen this being implemented quite successfully. And so there's some, light as well, some hope on the horizon as well. I think these kind of meetings will probably progress even further in the future. And we have one meeting of a Center for Positive Psychology started up with 80 registrants, virtual meeting initiated by them through social media. This was running now for 3 or 4 weeks. It started with 80 and now it's 230,000 participants. So these are dimensions we could never maybe thought with a real meeting. So there are pros and cons to that. The dissemination, PhD postdocs just asking, in the chat or so, it's not going to be the same in this Zoom chats as it is in the other media. And sometimes I think people were asking, first of all, breakout sessions for those meetings or maybe informal, just a cocktail-like drink on the side to just really get to each other, to know each other a bit more, because there's only one person can speak at a single time and as these things go. So this has been a big impact, I think, for the young researchers. Overall, my 2 project, there's positive and negatives. Positive also can be that we have now more tighter work package subgroups meetings, because we have a schedule now, and a lot of PIs are in these subgroup meetings. So there's a bit of more. I've never been informed as much about my project than I was when the time before COVID, to be honest, because you are on this virtual media, they're very intense, but they also can give you a lot of information back. As coordinator, I think it's sometimes even, it can be beneficial overall.
Yeah.
And our project is running at the moment. So we had, I think, unfortunately, the first COVID wave really hit Italy. One of our key partners was a northern Italian IPC researcher, and he had distribute these cell lines to other centers. That was the plan, and this stopped the progress of the project for at least 6 months as well. So that's obviously had an impact everywhere, I think, both experimentally as well as in clinical IMI projects.
Mm-hmm. But I think, I mean, as you rightfully point out, I mean, there are also in that sense a couple of well, maybe accelerations to a couple of solutions or adaptations that the pandemic has brought, but that are not necessarily something, you know, completely bad. I mean, some elements, if I hear you, I mean, the meetings are more, let's say, focused, condensed, because we are in virtual meetings like the entire day, if you like. Is one element. I mean, the virtual exchanges, okay, nothing beats, let's say, physical, but still, I mean, it's easier in a way to implement in that sense. Maybe Walter already raised it just very briefly, and then I want to go to Lynn. But I think one other thing, and Pieter, Jelle, you also highlighted it, and Andrew is. And that's something that we also have of course experienced in industry as well. So in some of the clinical trials, especially the ongoing ones, all of a sudden you go from, and we heard that from IMI EPAD and IMI AMIPAD as well, from, for example, the French center, they went from over 52 visits a week to less than 5 clinic visits. That it's in a way impacting, right, the quality, likely the quality of the study, especially participants or study participants already on an interventional drug. All of a sudden, you know that acceleration to a more remote way of working is happening, but it brings along quite some challenges. So I just briefly want to zoom in on those as well. I don't know, Lynn, if or Walter, you want to comment maybe on, because of course it puts a little bit remote assessments, the monitoring at home, maybe a little bit even more to the forefront, whether you want to comment on that a bit.
I can start, Walter. Well, it has really highlighted the need for us to change our working practices. That's clear. Everyone's accepted that, and we're never going to go back to the old ways of working. And if, in my opinion, we should have changed an awful lot sooner. So there will be multiple changes in how we run clinical trials and also in our clinical practices as well. So the tools that are being developed in projects such as Mobilized and IdeaFast really will support that, but we're not there yet for truly remote trials. I'm sure that Walter will have his own opinions. We're developing the tools and validating them, but the notion that you truly will have a BYO smartphone that's going to collect everything and you'll never interact with the patient, I think is unlikely ever to happen. There needs to be some form of interaction. We can just reduce it significantly. On a positive note, yes, recruitment is challenging. We're running a study. Walter's one of the centres. We have a site in Newcastle as well. So we're running our technical validation study in Mobilized to validate the software and the sensor as a prelude to our clinical validation study that will start next year. You can't reduce face-to-face visits in that because of the very nature of the technology that's involved. The study also involves a home visit as well. So you can imagine the challenges around delivering that study in the climate that we have at the moment. And like many others, we were closed down completely in the first wave. We're all in the second wave of COVID now and have learnt to manage risk, and sites are open to recruitment again and are actively recruiting participants. Things that are, and it's made us have to think about flexible working, things that encourage patients to come in and engage are having sites that are not in a hospital. We have some advantages in Newcastle because we have a clinical research facility which is off the main hospital site. Home visits, in fact, are more acceptable than one might imagine from patients, which is surprising. We thought that would be the absolute killer, that people would not accept someone coming into the home, but in fact, that's not been the case. And there's been a recent survey from Parkinson's UK to Parkinson's patients asking of their views now and taking part in clinical research, and they are not put off. Interestingly, they still want to be involved. There was a lot of backlash against research being shut down overnight, and a feeling that we will all share that suddenly any gains that have been made really were having to struggle to even get back to where we were. Patients see that as well, so they are willing and able, as long as the right safety procedures are in place. They do see the value of remote monitoring as well, so they are, I think they're happy to take part in studies such as IdeaFast, Andrew Owens studies as well, and the work that we're doing in Mobilised. That's a long answer to your question.
That's fine. Andrew or Walter, I don't know if you want to add anything to that as well.
I think Lynn touched on an important point there, is that perhaps argument number one from many reviewers is that you can't burden older adults with these kind of remote approaches because it's, you know, it's too much for them to, you know, take on. And there is a lack of information in the literature that's done the PPI work, but we've been doing it for radar AD. And if you speak to any patients about this, they're more than happy to embrace remote assessment and remote approaches. They feel, you know, it's empowering. They're not fazed by it. They do see it as a challenge, but it also gives them an active and empowering role in their own healthcare. It keeps them engaged, whilst also providing information during clinic visits. So if anything, I think at least, you know, we're looking to push out a paper at the moment from Radar AD on our patient and carer workshops, asking them about the use of remote technology and what areas of function they think are affected by Alzheimer's. And it's really good to get their input and fold that into the design of the research that you're doing as well.
Okay. And I agree as well. I think one of the challenges as well is that I mean, working with many of the vendors or actors in the field, I mean, they often all come with different, you know, platforms or technologies as well. I mean, I think the holy grail, especially for an older adults population, is also, you know, one integrated platform or device in that sense who can do it all right. Is there any concern that and I understood also from Lynn, and you're right, I think not going completely remotely will be a bit difficult, looking at the type of assessments that are often included, but just zooming in a little bit on, for example, questionnaires that you pose as a clinician to a participant or a study participant. Is that something that can be done in a remote way? Just very high level that I'm asking it. I mean, you don't have to zoom in on the actual scientific validity of a specific questionnaire or whatsoever, but would this be, you know, doable to do this more in a remote setting, telemedicine wise? I don't know, looking at the clinicians here, Walter or Pieter, Jelle, or Lynn, go ahead.
Well, for sure, we're doing some work in the UK on remote trial delivery. We're reviewing old studies, existing studies, and learning from changing practice. I think we would all agree that there are lots of things we ask patients to come and sit in a clinic room for that's really unnecessary. So it goes back to my comment, we need to change how we work. We've needed to for a while, and this has forced us to reevaluate.
And maybe I can also comment on that from the Parkinson's point of view. And I think Radar AD is really a brilliant example, a very early example, and I have to congratulate for that project. And here in Parkinson's, we are also from the Movement Disorders Task Force very active in designing entirely new aspects or approaches to get the perception of people from the home environment in a life situation. So really that we design entirely novel diaries. So this is really a paradigm change, and this is also driven by COVID-19, by the way. And so when you, Lennert, talk about questionnaires, so this is what we validated, what we did in the hospital, as you said, Lynn, we validated them in the hospital. Of course, we can ask these questions also at home, or we should ask them these questions at home to be as close to reality as possible. But when you are really thinking of how the questions are phrased, then you see that they are coming from psychologists, from clinicians. They are not coming from those that are really affected by the disease. And maybe so the development of novel questionnaires, when we really include those who are affected by a disease in the development and how we have to ask these questions, this will be really a new level of accuracy, a new level of data quality we will assess. And then when we add, in addition, that we collect this information in a live assessment, so we can collect it twice, thrice a day in a certain situation. People say, okay, now this is exactly what I feel now. And we can overcome the problem of so retention or issues, etc., which is a problem now. Then we will have an entirely novel quality of data, and will help industry and all these developers of new treatment. And I'm very convinced that this is a huge chance for us.
Yes, so maybe I think that's a nice comment also, that you not will translate your traditional rating skills and tests to a digital environment, but that you make optimal use of the digital environment to develop new tests and interactive questionnaires, adaptive questionnaires. So what I hear from our neurologists who see the patients at the memory clinic, they like the follow-up visits, doing that remotely. So instead of having a patient coming to your office, talk 10 minutes with them, and then the patient has to travel back, it's much more efficient also for the patient to dial in with a video call. So that will change clinical practice, definitely. So it reduces the need for patients to come to the hospital, but of course we need to do a lumbar puncture and scans, and we cannot do that at home. And I think a nice example of a new approach is what we apply in Radar AD. So we are one of the clinical sites and involved also in the clinical study. The memory tests are done online on a phone, and now we can do delayed memory assessments over days or over weeks instead of over 10 minutes. So they have to remember words and other things. So that opens a complete new way of testing cognition. And they don't have to come to the hospital, and they find those cognitive tests rather difficult to do and challenging. And they see it if they fail, they've experienced a failure, those early dementia, but with those remote tests, it may be easier for them to complete those tests and more agreeable.
Okay, maybe stepping back a bit to what Lynn just mentioned, like in terms of and just for the audience to know, so we do have many of the IMI projects that are actually conducting some sort of a clinical research study as well, with actual visits to sites. I mean, in general, there is indeed a little bit the uncertainty at the moment, like will it impact participation, right, of people, and I mean, Lynn, it's encouraging to hear what you just mentioned there, from a couple of research conducted, that it's not necessarily the case. But I think, I mean, with the pandemic again, you know, starting to rage again across Europe, it's again holding a bit our breath, right, in terms of whether people are willing to participate or just travel for a research study? Because I think, I mean, we're especially looking at a vulnerable population in that sense. So is there any concern around the impact of recruitment? And I think the other bit that I wanted to mention to make it more complex, the question, is that, and we see it here in Belgium, so many of our sites linked to a hospital, they do get from the government a certain quota, like an amount of beds need to be made available for COVID-19 support. And so less beds are being available for research studies. So I think both that, the operational, and then the impact on recruitment, is that something of concern for your projects, your IMI projects?
I can talk about the UK perspective. The initial response to the first wave was to shut everything down, redirect all clinical staff to the front line, clear the hospitals, and which was necessary in some settings, not in all settings. It was a blanket approach. And the second wave has not adopted that approach. Research has remained open with appropriate cautions in place. And that there is not the same push to redirect staff back to the front line, unless, of course, things dramatically change. And the key thing is it's a rapidly changing situation, and we just have to be prepared to be flexible and adaptable in line with that. However, the direction is to keep studies running with appropriate safeguards in place, and be very clear and communicate with participants about those safeguards, what we are doing to keep them safe, to give them confidence to take part, and that's absolutely critical, but also for the professional staff that are engaged in those studies as well, for whom there is also a risk of face-to-face contact. So they're critical things to think about. Recruitment is definitely impacted, there's no doubt about it. It would be naive to think otherwise. It is what it is. We just have to do the best we can. And if we put those steps in place, we think about the environment we're asking people to come into, we make things as safe as possible, we communicate effectively, then that's all we can do to put ourselves in as best position as possible. But we're not in the game, and certainly we're not in the game of persuading people to take part in the study. They either want to or they don't. There's no, we shouldn't be, and we're not applying pressure.
And of course, and I absolutely understand, but we also know that these IMI projects come with quite rigorous, timelines and deliverables and a project plan as well, right? So, and I know that ID Fast and Mobilize D are maybe still at the quite a beginning of the project, so then there may be a little bit less concern. But I think in that sense, is there any concern that, for example, you may just not simply meet timelines, and are you aware of any flexibility of funders or on to accommodate that a little bit? I mean, Lynn, you're happy to, but others also feel free to comment.
Maybe I can give some experience from my project. It was a two-phase response from the EU. First of all, they were open to everything after some delay. Then we submitted a proposal with changed milestones deliverables, and as requested, and then the response came back that we should maybe do this in a two-step approach. First, see how we get along in the time frame originally designed in terms of maybe moving some deliverables further down the line or cutting out some experiments, and some deliverables reduce basically the content. And then have a panel review, and then decide about whether or not we're going to actually do a cost-neutral extension to the project. So their approach to this, at least our PO program officer, has changed. So the initial response of flexibility is being met with a bit more cautious in the second step. But then who knows what's going to happen next with the current wave, and it could all be back to where we were. So it is a fluid process, like everything about COVID, and we experienced that as well in our IMI project.
Yeah, it will be challenging. So we are recruiting for Radar AD at the moment, and that stopped for a few months, and then we started in a few sites again. The patients are there. We have all the digital devices. The whole platform is there. So we would benefit from, at some point, probably, or we need one, a cost-neutral extension. But cost neutral means that we have to pay the staff, the research assistants and the PhD students also longer. So that's not budget neutral. So maybe there's some flexibility from that part with IMI. I don't know.
Yeah, the other thing is the industry partners have to agree as well, because they have mostly in-kind or cash contributions planned in their budget for a certain time period. So they have to also then adjust their budget has increased as well. It has to increase as well if we do a cost-neutral extension, which is not cost-neutral, as Pieter correctly addressed. It's not at all cost-neutral for anybody.
Yeah, we were indicated that we could have a no-cost extension, but there isn't any such thing as a no-cost extension. That's poor terminology.
Yeah, go ahead, Walter. Go ahead.
So what I realize is, I see that we are talking about the current issues we are facing with the COVID-19 situation, and I think they are really reality and they're very important. And every project is in a different phase, and they are really affected by the disease. But when I see the title of this discussion, what do we do in the post-COVID era, then it may also be good to see lessons learned out of such pandemics. And I would again stress that we maybe also the IMI, this is a big ship. These are the largest projects in this form that exist in the world, and maybe we can also be in a way trendsetters of what should happen in the future. And indeed, we see a lot of issues with the current form we perform trials, for example. And when we will face the next pandemic, maybe we will never get rid of COVID-19. So this is something what we have to address in a way. We have to be accurate but fast, and when we adapt. And this is maybe also something where we see some light at the end of the tunnel. And I like that. I think it's challenging, but also that's what you say, it is very difficult, but maybe we can give some advice how we should design the future clinical trial.
Yep, sounds good, and I can definitely see some role for Neuronet maybe towards IMI as well, in terms of pulling together lessons learned. I mean, you're also all part of Neuronet, so maybe that's something that we can take along. I'm virtually looking at Carlos, but I'm sure that he has heard it as well. But so that's something that we can definitely do. Maybe just to bring us back to, let's say, the core of a PPP, it contains many stakeholders across Europe, public, private sector, across different countries. I mean, teams meet often face to face, right? Because they are so globally scattered in a way. Is that something that is concerning? Is it in a way mitigated with with some of the virtual meetings? I mean, Jochen already alluded to it a little bit, but typically, I mean, those annual large consortium meetings, and if you look at IMI EPAT, there were over 200 researchers participating in there. I mean, usually those 2-3 days of very condensed meetings with the entire team face to face kind of gets you back to align on your position, deliverables, your project plan, and so forth. Do you miss that interaction? Martin.
Certainly, yes. I mean, one thing that, with all the appraisal of, Teams and Zoom and all the remote formats and video conferencing. Lots of things work surprisingly well, but what you cannot replace is the interaction, the direct interaction, the debate sort of. I remember some of these sessions we had with Neuronet, for instance, that were quite interesting, and so all the digital exchange formats have their limitations, clearly, and I think Pieter Jelle made the point already with the interaction, for instance, with PhD students or so. That's just one facet. The running projects and trying to create a spirit that you can sense, that you feel, that's in the room. It's not in the virtual room. Typically, I mean, the sort of excitement and now, yeah, let's go for it and let's do that and so on. All that is somehow attenuated. It is slowed down. It is made indirect, and therefore, I think the new normal will certainly not be the the totally remote virtual type of project steering, project management, and so on. We still will in the future need these meetings where people come together, where you have in the end your group photo, where you have been fighting over days, struggling to make things better, to address things, exchange different viewpoints, and so on. Unfortunately, in particular, exchanging different viewpoints typically leads to a voice that is raised, when you speak loud or you yell at each other or so. And this is exactly where you spread the virus most. So we have to be careful with that, extremely. Mm-hmm. But I see no way to make these face-to-face meetings obsolete. No way.
I think we had a little bit too many face-to-face meetings, actually. So I'm happy several have been skipped. So smaller steering board meetings, not GAs, were also face-to-face, and you have to travel. And I was traveling a few times a month for that kind of meeting. So and those smaller meetings could perfectly be done remotely. But so general assembly is a different beast, and in particular for the younger researchers, it's important to integrate and connect and network.
Any other thoughts on that topic?
I'm with Pieter. I think there were a lot of meetings that could have been done remotely, and when you factor in the cost and the time that go into traveling, especially if you have to go outside the country you're based in. But then conversely, as Martin was touching on, that it was suggested to me that we should organize an early career, like cocktail evening for the early career researchers working on radar AD. And I said, but only one person can talk at a time if we do it on, some sort of platform, so it's not really going to work. And again, there you see that if you need the kind of consolidation of ideas to, have some firm outcomes, then you do really need that face-to-face interaction. Some of the other stuff that's more formulaic, I think it can be worked out via digital meetings. It can be primed beforehand by exchanging agendas and outcomes that you want. But there's no substituting for the sort of positivity that you get from a face-to-face meeting when they're required.
And maybe linked to that, and I think maybe also especially relevant to this conference as well. I think in many of the current research programs, including IMI and PPPs, is of course the very important role of actual participants, right, and patients. So I know that many of these projects have some sort of a PPI being done. So having a participant panel, organizing like some kind of an advocacy board up front to really have the voice also of patients and participants when designing studies or conducting research. But clearly, I mean, of course, also because of the travel restrictions, which may well extend far in 2021, right? Is there any concern on that front that it will be much more difficult to have participants involved in a way in research? Do you think of any alternatives? And of course, keep in mind, we are talking in many cases older adults, right? So all those virtual meetings, Zoom, Teams, I mean, sometimes even for me, it's a bit a bit difficult to understand it. Also, any concerns there, or any alternatives, or anything you want to share?
We've been managing to have patient forums online. In fact, I've been involved in a few now. And, you know, given that it's not the same, we all know it's not the same as meeting in face-to-face. The whole tempo of the conversation is different. One person has to talk at once. They've gone remarkably well. I think we need to be careful not to go, oh, they're old people, they won't know how to use technology. So we do need to be a little bit cautious about that. I think Andrew's just highlighted that there's no fear that, in fact, a lot of the patients that we have are pretty adept at using technology, and patients want to be involved in the research. They want to have a voice. It's really important. So I think that you will find that they're prepared to do their best to join us if we want to talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think home visits could be a good alternative. So we are performing a follow-up visit of one of the IMI EMIF projects in neurodegeneration. So these are very old people, some with cognitive impairment. And we thought it would be difficult to make appointments with them and accepting them for visiting them at home. But they were very happy, actually, to see somebody coming over and talking to them and asking questions. So, and I hear the same from another project in Amsterdam with centenarians. They're open for visits. So that could be an alternative to cope with patient or research participant or whatever. With your mask and other things, of course.
Okay, good. I'm just going to look at the chat to see if we have any questions. So we have about 10 minutes left. I do have a final question for all of you. I see that Stina just mentioned, like, home visits are a great idea, but here in Scotland, not allowed, unfortunately. So there will definitely be some local restrictions as well to that, just as a notion. Well, if people have any other questions, please feel free to still type them on the chat. So final question to all of you would definitely be, how do you see PPP's research once this is all over, or not sure, or what will in the new normal, because indeed the coronavirus may stick around for some time. How do you see research happening, but also what are your aspirations in that sense? What is something that we should definitely focus on? And I'm just going to run through the order on my screen. So Martin, you're up first.
I'm first. So what comes next? We all know about the IHI initiative, so the follow-up of IMI. I hear various things about the new scope and the new rules and the new focus. I would expect, given the urgent need at the EU level of coming up with nice examples for EU-mediated innovation, that the pressure on being at a technology readiness level higher than we had it in IMI will be quite strong, and curious to see what comes next. I have little expectations on my side. we all adapt to the framework conditions that are put into place, and I rather do not comment on the political agenda behind that.
Okay, thanks a lot. Andrew, any wishes?
Yeah, I mean, I am writing some grant applications at the moment, and you know, all of them will now have to have some sort of plan in place if they're to be successful, that will sidestep the restrictions of the pandemic. So even right now, it's the applications we're writing, you know, we're kind of carrying on as if by next year, the middle of next year, hopefully things are more back to normal, and that's the framework that we're writing these grant applications in. But also embedded in them is the long-term view that may not be the case, that the COVID may be around for a long time. It's also had a big effect on the, as I mentioned, the funding calls that have been closed and have been closed for the foreseeable future, because the funding bodies either aren't focused on infectious diseases, or they just don't have any other warrants to have funding open during COVID. And then also we're always being approached by technology companies who have a device that they think could be relevant to neurodegeneration or older adults and their physical and mental health. Some of those have a larger finance behind them are still coming to us and still asking to collaborate. The smaller companies, for example, we were looking at remote EEG assessment. The company pulled out of that because they just didn't have the funding under COVID to then move into a new patient group. They wanted to stick with epilepsy, even though they were hanging in there for a few months during lockdown at the beginning of COVID. They just didn't have the business model to keep going, which was a shame. But I guess it's a case of, you know, it's a boring answer. We just have to wait and see what happens. There's the effect on the research, the effect on the patients, and the effect on the people doing the research and their careers. And we're just having to be pragmatic and deal with what comes, and on a day-to-day basis, or whatever brainwave the government then puts in place, having to negotiate that and keep going.
Okay, thanks. Pieter, Jelle?
So I think those remote assessment tools will be very valuable in the future, but of course we need to validate them, and there are several projects ongoing that will try to validate them now. So, but if it works, then that would be a good tool for future studies. So the funding for Alzheimer's disease in the Netherlands will continue. So a month ago, 20 million euro was allocated for a Dutch Alzheimer program. So because, well, in a way, dementia people suffer most from COVID, or have the highest risk for dying. And I think in general we will be less traveling and more having those remote meetings with each other. But I hope, of course, everything will go back as soon as possible. But we have to be realistic that it may not be within 6 months from now, but it may take longer.
Okay, thanks a lot. Walter?
Yeah, so I hope that the post-COVID situation helps us to be more flexible with regard to the design and conduction of our projects, including our studies and clinical trials, which could, for example, mean that when we have clinical sites that recruit, that this can be more flexible, that when we have some epidemic phases in one country, that maybe another country can jump in, and etc., which is not trivial, I understand, because you have to hire people, etc. But another wish I have is that, especially with regard to regulatory agencies, and also something what had to be mentioned very shortly, but I think this is indeed necessary that we have to approach these regulatory agencies and ask them whether they can be more flexible with regard to what they accept, especially with the development of new assessment strategies. And of course, they should be harmonized. So this is also very, very tricky. So if one country has one rule and the other country has another rule, that is something what kills everything, especially in pharma trials. So Brexit will not make things easier, and something what we also learn, that we have in policy, we have some tendency of distraction, but this is something what we do not can adapt in research. But if we can counteract that would be great. That is my wish.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot for sharing. Jochen?
Thanks. Of course, now I'm the last, one of the last ones, and there's less to say now. It's a bit like in the, what's that show, the Family Food or whatever show, with the person at the end then has the most difficult task. No, I do agree. Data sharing going to be more important. Data harmonization and GDPR we should really consider making those more accessible and more interchangeable, and that's going to be a huge challenge, I think, going forward. And I think we're going to learn that we have to just work together better with sharing and data harmonization, data sharing, and data protection, data conservation as well. That when the project is finished, that data is not just going to go somewhere and nobody knows where it's going. These are all things I think we discussed in Neuronet quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And going forward, I think, yeah, COVID and neurological disorders going to be another big theme going forward. I think the whole aspect, I mean, so far it's been a great review, I think, from Konstantin Jadakola in Cell on Ion, published on blood-brain barrier effects and the importance of blood-brain barrier in AD and PD and ALS is all pretty well established. So there's going to be, I think, a lot of new research coming in that area going forward. So, and a lot of funding in that area as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I see that it's going. These two areas will be very critical.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks a lot. And then last, indeed, Lynn.
So I have the hardest job because well, I echo everything that's been said. I had jotted down 3 points. So the first is not to try and recreate the past, is to learn and make the most of the opportunities and what we've learned. Remote technology is firmly on the radar. We need to be dynamic, and the systems that we work in need to equally be dynamic. This reflects Walter's comments about flexibility. We have to be able to move at a more rapid pace than our existing systems allow us to do, particularly regulatory systems. And then finally, we have to work more collaboratively. There have to be more collaborative efforts. We have to pull together. It's going to be a really rough environment out there, and the more we pull together, the better it will be.
Okay, that's a nice summary. We're at the end of the meeting, but maybe just one aspiration from my end. So I think more than ever, it's important to keep on working on that awareness and breaking through the stigma. I think we're all doing a good job there, but I think it's needed more than ever. I was just speaking to my neighbor earlier this week. She knows I'm working in the neurodegeneration space, and I said, like, I see things a little bit shifting, and she said, like, yeah, but it's nowhere as important as COVID-19, because this is acute and it's hitting the world and there are so many people dying. And then I said, like, well, I mean, the area that I'm working in, it's kind of the same, but it's all about perception, right? So that is a bit my aspiration. So many thanks to all of the participants. I hope everyone enjoyed a bit the session. I wish you the best of luck for the rest of the meeting and then the closing ceremony as well. But thanks for attending.